expected points, projected goals, clean sheet odds, and who is the best captain. This video has got all of the information that you need to know ahead of Game Week 14. Now, Game Week 14 is actually quite a special game week because we've got an early release of Rob T FPL data. Why do I like this data so much? Well, Rob T FPL, by the way, if you haven't already, is one of the best accounts on social media for FPL to follow. And what he does is converts betting data, so the outputs of the gambling companies, who ultimately they spend the most money of anyone on trying to predict the outcomes. They have the most advanced maths, most advanced algorithms on predicting the outcomes of football games because they want to set their odds to a point where they can make the most money, right? And why not use that for FPL? And that's exactly what Rob T FPL does every week. So we've got here a view of all of the fixtures for Game Week 14, the predicted goals, or projected goals, I should say. I don't know what came out of my mouth then. Clean sheet odds for each of the teams. I'll go through the highlights. I won't go through them all because I'll be here forever, but I'll go through the highlights, the ones that are coloured in. In terms of projected goals, Everton, Liverpool, Arsenal, Fulham, Man City, Chelsea, Aston Villa, Bournemouth and Tottenham are the top teams. They're all projected, if you round it up, they're all projected to score at least 2 goals. In terms of clean sheet odds, leading teams, we've got Everton, 31% against Wolves, Arsenal, 40% against Man United. I would question that. They did look pretty good, did Man United in Game Week 13. Man City, 46% against Forest, although based on how they've played against Liverpool so far, I'm not too sure how well I believe that, although Forest haven't created all that many chances from open play in recent games, so could well be some truth in that. Chelsea, 36% against Southampton and 2.4 projected goals. I think Southampton are at their weakest they've been all season. They're without Harwood Bellis, Bednarek, Dibbling, they're missing, and Ramsdale. So they're missing loads of key players. So this could be an absolute banger of a fixture for Chelsea. And obviously that man, you can see there, Cole Palmer. Aston Villa, 29%, and that's the highlights. I just thought I'd start the video by looking at the projected goals and clean sheets from Rob T FPL. Now I'm going to start by looking at the projected points according to Fantasy Football Hub. And straight away, goalkeepers wise, for Game Week 14 in isolation, it's already quite interesting. Ederson is top, although if you've seen the Liverpool game, he didn't even start. Ortega was the goalkeeper. So I would suggest this kind of is based on their clean sheet odds, right? We've just seen what the Rob T FPL model says for Man City's likelihood to keep a clean sheet, and we can see here, I think those expected points are kind of based on that. But obviously, Ederson didn't start the Liverpool game. Is Ortega now the first choice Man City goalkeeper? Maybe. I personally, even if Ederson was playing, I don't think I'd pick him in this kind of form that Man City are in. But interesting to see he's still top for projected points. Got Jordan Pickford, David Raya, Martinez, Muric of Ipswich, Rob Sanchez, who becoming an increasingly attractive pick in FPL in my mind, if that's the right way to say it. And then Hermansen of Leicester. And then in terms of the next 5 game weeks, well, we've got Raya taking the lead. Good fixtures for Arsenal coming up. They're looking pretty strong defensively. It took a couple of goals from defenders for West Ham for them to... I just think in general they've looked really solid in the last few games, even though they conceded a couple of goals against West Ham. I think, low XG chances, I would say. Ederson's up there, which I guess you should translate to rather than Ederson as in just the Man City goalkeeper. Not sure I'd be picking the Man City goalkeeper at the moment, though. Martinez of Villa, not sure I'd be actually picking him despite his good fixtures. Sanchez of Chelsea, like I said, he looks to be pretty good. Muric, Forster of Tottenham, and Jordan Pickford are your top goalkeepers, according to Fantasy Football Hub, for the next 5 game weeks. All right, then next up, we've got the defenders, and it's quite interesting viewing again to see that the Man City defenders still dominate in terms of being the top team for expected points. I'm just saying what the data is. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with this, but I think what we're seeing here is all of the betting markets and projection algorithms, they're not just looking at the last 3 or 4 games for Man City. They're looking at historic data, right, and how good they've been in not only seasons gone by, but even at the start of this season, right? So that's why we're seeing them there. And regardless, of how they've played, Forest have not been a team that have created all that many chances. So I'm not surprised to see Man City players named towards the top in terms of expected points. But you've got Guardiola here, who didn't start against Liverpool. You'd obviously question if he's ready to go for Game Week 14. I suggest he probably is, and it's a bit of a rest really against Liverpool. And he did look really poor defensively in Game Week 12 as well. Alexander-Arnold is the next best. Newcastle away, decent fixture for him. Although I always feel like, I say it's a decent fixture, I always feel like Newcastle are pretty good at St James's Park, and I'd back them to do pretty well against anyone, to be honest. Walker and Ruben Diaz, two other Man City players I'd say are just predicted to play. Obviously, those strong clean sheet odds against Forest are propelling their players towards the top of these lists. Matty Cash, Calafiori and Branthwaite are your other top defenders in game week 14 for expected points. Slightly different view for the next 5 game weeks. You can still see some Man City players mixed in there, but Liverpool and Arsenal are also up there. We got Trent as the top defender for the expected points over the next 5. I think the reason, naturally you'd think Gabriel would be up there, right, as Arsenal defence, but I think the fact he got subbed off at half time in game week 13 puts a little bit of doubt as to his minutes, I'd say, for game week 14. So that's why you don't see him on the projections there. You can see 3.4 expected points for game week 14, but he's up there because he's just so good for the next 5. Virgil van Dijk's up there as well, and actually 6.5 million. On the face of it, might be quite expensive, but it's looking really threatening, I think, from corners and set pieces in terms of offering goal threats. He hasn't scored in the Man City game at the time that I'm recording this, but how dangerous he's looked from corners. I wouldn't be surprised if after this video goes up, he'll have a goal against his name. I think he's a really decent option. And one thing you can actually guarantee about Van Dijk is just that he plays every game. He's got a really good injury record. Obviously, did get that really bad knee injury that Jordan Pickford did to him. But outside of that, he's been pretty solid when it comes to his injury record. Calafiori could be an interesting option for Arsenal there at 5.8 million. Then you got Walker and Ruben Diaz. But in my opinion, though, I'd probably just stay completely clear of any of those Man City defenders at the moment. And then I thought it would also be useful to look at the best defenders for the next 5, but that list is dominated by expensive defenders, and no one's team is going to be full of just expensive defenders. So it's also worth looking, in my opinion, at cheap defenders for the next 5. And what I've done here is set a filter at 5 million and below and done, just a sort basically for expected points. Ait-Nouri is still top. He's still on 4 yellow cards, so he's ready to play in game week 14. I'd say, though, I don't know. They're playing a back 4 now at Wolves, and at 4.9 million, that's quite a lot of money for the returns he's provided in recent game weeks. Matty Cash, I just don't know how Villa are looking to look in their next games. They're really poor against Chelsea, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Unai Emery change any of those 11 players after their performance against Chelsea, genuinely. So I probably wouldn't trust Matty Cash. I also probably wouldn't trust Konsa as well. I think both of these guys, I don't necessarily think Konsa's going to get dropped, but I just don't back Villa to keep clean sheets at the moment. Estupinian at Brighton could be a nice option. Gusto at Chelsea. Now, Chelsea are actually seemingly able to keep clean sheets. Even the Leicester game in game week 12, right? They're only a penalty away from keeping a clean sheet in that game. And one singular mistake cost them the goal. They actually looked quite solid defensively and obviously kept the clean-o against Aston Villa as well. Kirkez got the goal in game week 14. I'd say he's a pretty decent option. Looks fairly attacking. Bournemouth got decent fixtures. Yeah, I quite like him as an option, as do I like Lewis Hall as well, although I would say with Lewis Hall, he's probably going to play most of the games, but I think during this busy festive period, he's due 1 or 2 benchings, but it does look like a pretty decent option. So midfielders up next then, and for game week 14 in isolation, Cole Palmer is top, and I got to agree with this. I said when going through the projections earlier on in the video that Southampton are really heavily weakened, and I don't think these expected points are actually fully factoring that in either. I would definitely say Cole Palmer is ahead in terms of expected points over both Salah and Saka. For game week 14, Southampton look really weak. I probably agree with that. No surprise, of course, to see Salah and Saka up there. Foden's up there as well, but again, do you really trust any of these Man City players at the moment? I'm struggling. Son's got Bournemouth. Eze could be a nice option. Back in the team for Crystal Palace. 6.6 million, got Ipswich away. He could be really nice. And Odegaard, 4.9% ownership, 8.3 million. Takes the odd penalty as we saw in game week 13. He's got Man United at home. I actually think he could be quite a nice option at that price point. In terms of midfielders for the next 5 game weeks, we've got Salah, Palmer, Saka and Son as top. I mean, what we're seeing here is basically the most expensive midfielders in the game dominating the list. And I guess the interesting thing is just to see the order they're in. Salah is still top, despite Palmer being ahead for game week 14. Saka in 3rd, Son in 4th. Foden's up there, but I haven't seen enough from Phil Foden yet. What we're seeing here, I think, is historic data kind of backing up his projections, because obviously you're not just going to base expected points on the last 2 or 3 game weeks, right? And then Bruno Fernandes and Eze. Eze's up there as well. He was really disappointing at the start of the season. Massively underperformed his XG and expected assists. So yeah, maybe he could produce something now he's back in the Palace team. So what we've just seen there is the top midfielders, you know, regardless of price for the next 5. But again, the list was dominated by expensive midfielders. So what we've got here is the top cheap midfielders for the next 5 game weeks. What I would say is that some of these guys are good options, but the middle 4, Kulusevski, Trossard, Madueke and Johnson, I personally wouldn't pick these guys because, quite honestly, I just don't think you can guarantee they're going to start every game. And particularly over this busy Christmas period, you want to be picking players that play every game. And I think Eze, Semenyo and probably Matoma on this list tick those boxes. And I think they're the 3 standouts at this price point because of that. Eze, I think, looks to be a really good option. I think his ownership is actually a lot lower than that as well. 7.7% ownership, I think, is largely dead teams. You know, players who started the season with Eze in their team, they just gave up on playing the game and still have him. Semenyo, I think, is going to be a really good option. You know, Bournemouth got good fixtures, come back from suspension, actually well rested, ready for the Christmas period. And Matoma seems to be putting up fairly decent numbers for Brighton, starting regularly. Brighton have good fixtures. I think he could be a good option too. Finishing off the expected points section then with the forwards. Haaland's top, Watkins second, Jackson third. Jackson looks pretty handy, doesn't he? It's just a shame he's got that 4th yellow. He's got that 5th yellow card sort of pending, I would say. Although the reset is fairly soon. I think it's game week 18 or 19 that they reset. So can he go 4-ish more game weeks without getting one? I don't know. I guess probably could, couldn't he? Havertz, Cunha, Mateta and Solanke are your top forwards game week 14. And then I haven't actually pulled out the best cheap forwards in the game, because we actually see some cheap forwards amongst the best. So you've got Haaland top, Isak second. Obviously, picked up an injury in game week 13. Doesn't look to be serious. Did just look like a knock. Obviously, question marks as to whether he plays in game week 14. I suspect that he won't play in game week 14 because Callum Wilson is back and can take his place. And then he'll be back for game week 15. That's just my personal prediction on Isak. Cunha, I spoke probably a little bit too harshly about him in the lead up to game week 13, but I was just saying that I don't think his level of returns that he was getting before that point was sustainable, purely because he was scoring so many goals from outside the box. I just didn't think he could keep that up, and I still believe that. Obviously, he blanked in game week 13. I don't think he's a bad option, but I just think the absolute ridiculous level of returns he was putting up just wasn't sustainable. Watkins and Jackson are up there as well. Jackson just has got such a good run of fixtures coming up as well. I really like him as an option. It's just a shame he doesn't take penalties. And then Chris Wood, who's still sitting in my team. He's got Man City and Man United in his next 2. But based on how Man City are looking at the moment, I don't think it's too far-fetched to suggest Chris Wood could score against them. Neither Man United. And then they got Villa. What's that? Villa, Brentford and Tottenham. I think that's, you know, not the worst set of fixtures in the world based on current form. And if I had Chris Wood, which I actually do, I'm actually really struggling to justify getting rid of him just with how reliable he's been so far this season. You've got Havertz up there as well, who is a nice little differential option with the quality of fixtures that Arsenal have. He could be a good option in FPL as well. So here are your top forwards for the next 5. Rounding things off then, I've got a couple of expected point sources for captaincy, and then I'll talk through who I think are the best options. So FPL review right now. This might change after the Liverpool-Man City game, but it's got Haaland as the top player for expected points. 7.5, Palmer on 7.3, and then there's a bit of a gap between them, Saka and Salah. Those are obviously, in my mind, the 4 best captaincy shouts, and it's between those 4 as to who you actually go for. And then Fantasy Football Hub, we've just gone through them. Palmer on 7.6, Haaland on 7.2, Salah on 7.2, Saka on 7.1. Honestly, you want my opinion? I think Cole Palmer is the best captain for game week 14. Like I said, with Southampton, they're depleted. No Ramsdale, no Bednarek, no Harvard-Bellis, no Dibbling. They're really weak. And I think it's the best time you could possibly ask to play Southampton in my mind. Palmer off the back of a goal in game week 13 against Villa. Yeah, I think he looks great. It's going to be a great option for that game. Yeah, Chelsea are going to do well. I think he's probably the best captain for game week 14. As it stands, the armband for me is going to go on Palmer. If you don't have him, I think the next best thing to do, I know his expected points are substantially lower, but I'd probably give it to Salah, to be honest. Just with the form he's been in this season, how well Liverpool have been playing, I think he's just edges it above Haaland and Saka. So yeah, that's who I think is the best captain. But let me know in the comments who your captain's going to be for game week 14. All right, and that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. Quite a quick turnaround on all the FPL content this week, given we've got a deadline on Tuesday. So yeah, this will be my second video ahead of Game Week 14. I will have done 3 live streams before as well, so it's just gone crazy with FPL content. My plan is to make a team selection video on Monday and then go live for a deadline stream on Tuesday afternoon once I finish work. So yeah, it's all going on this week. It's going to be a bit mental. So yeah, stay tuned for that content coming up. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like rating. Like I said, let me know in the comments who your captain's going to be for Game Week 14. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Golden Goal channel. It should be just there on your screen. That's everything. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in my next video.